Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thought. Now let's start the video. A social shy made Jon Connington. Seeing Norvos in the distance, he once again wondered if this was a good idea. While he knew why Aegon wished it, given what had happened with Daenerys and the Hound, he wasn't sure they should do this. But his king had been insistent, and he cursed Illyrio and even himself for not destroying the letter. He wasn't even sure if they were still here, and surely if they were, then Illyrio would have dealt with them by now. But Aegon, hearing that his aunt was in Norvos, was in no mood to wait for others to bring her to him. Not any longer. Despite countless conversations, both from him and Septa Lemore, Aegon was convinced he was to marry his aunt, and that together they would usher in a golden age of Targaryen rule. While it was a pretty thought, Jon wasn't sure if Daenerys was a fit consort for his king, the stories he had heard marking her out more a savage than a princess. What if she does not wish to marry you? Aegon, Septa Lemore asked. Why would she not marry me? I am to be king, we are the last of our line. It is what father would have wished. Aegon said determinedly, or he may not. Your father was against incestuous marriages. Aegon, I believe had he lived, he'd have wished you marry into a great house for the alliance. Lady Margaery is of age, and the Tyrells bring the reach. Flowery fools who sat besieging a keep while my father fell. What use are they to me if they would not fight when they were needed most? Jon said angrily, and while he agreed with his king, the numbers didn't lie. What of Arianne? Lemore asked, and Jon was glad of the help. My uncle will support me upon my return. There is no need to wed my cousin. Aegon said, and Jon couldn't help but smile at his king's intellect. While that is true, Aegon, your aunt brings us nothing but her name, a name you have already. You are the rightful heir. Should they know of you then, houses throughout Westeros would be singing your name and toasting your return. They would? Aegon asked, a smile on his face. Of course they would, my king, but houses are fickle too. They also seek to rise, they seek to gain, and the easiest way to do so is with a union by marriage. With yourself and Princess Daenerys, you have 2 marriages to offer, he said, hoping to make Aegon see reason. No, Jon, I will marry my aunt, and that is final, Aegon said angrily before storming from the room. He sighed as he lay in his bed later that night. The girl had nothing to offer other than the 3 dragon eggs she'd stolen from Illyrio, and they were only good for coin. Something that, thanks to Illyrio, they had a large supply of. No, it was men they needed. They needed the support of the great houses, and there they had enough problems, without Aegon, wasting himself on a silly girl who thought herself a warrior. The Starks, Lannisters, and the Baratheons would all be against them. House Arryn too, and so that was 4 of the 7 kingdoms they could end up facing. The Ironborn would do as they would, and so that left them Dorne and the Loyalist houses. If they could also bring the Reach too, then they had a chance, but would the Reach come with no reward? If they could cause enough disruption, then with those numbers they would have more than a chance. Yet Aegon wished to throw all that away on a girl who wished to play with swords. That alone proved he was his father's son. Far more than the different shading of his eyes or hair proved him not to be, that he was so lost in the idea of being with an unsuitable girl showed him true. But while he had failed the father, Jon would ensure he didn't fail the son. He would ensure it by doing whatever it took. He vowed as he slept that night. Where is he asked Lemore angrily. The next morning. He, Duck, and Halden went into the town bright and early, she said as if she hadn't a care in the world. And you didn't wake me? He asked, his face red from the pressure he was putting on it, just so he'd not explode at the silly woman. For why? Young Griff wished to visit the town and brought his guard with him. What more could you have done? I could have refused him leave, he said. Good luck with that, she said dismissively as she walked away. Grabbing his sword, he left quickly and began to search the city. Norvos was far too large, though, and he doubted he had any chance of finding them at all. Something that was proved right, as over the course of the day he found no sign of them whatsoever. Feeling his worry rise and at times on the verge of panic, he almost didn't hear the talk of the young girl and the scarred man. He almost missed it, and was passing by when he turned back. What's that, you say? He asked the fisherman. Who are you, and what business of yours is what I say? The man asked suspiciously. A mere traveler friend. The scarred man is a man I know from long ago. You say he was here, he said, putting on his most friendly smile. I do, and that's all I'm saying. The man said as Jon reached into his tunic and pulled out some coins, quickly finding one with the 3 bells of Norvus on the front. How about now, he said, showing the man the coin which the man looked greedily at. He and the girl took the witch's ship, headed to Volantis the Force. Heard them say, the man said as Jon handed him the coin. The witch? Queen of the Shadow, evil woman, she put a spell on a friend of mine, turned him into a fish, and then fried him up and ate him. One of the other men said, And you're sure it was Volantis? He asked, wondering what to do with the knowledge. I am, though, why you and a green boy wish to know of her is beyond me. The girl didn't even have no teats. Girl, green boy? He asked, confused. A while ago, a blue-haired boy asked me of her, and I told him, made more coin today with the tail than I did from fishing all week, the man said, laughing. After finding out that Aegon and the others had been here earlier and had gone to the Red Temple, he went to and found he was barred from entry, just as they had been. Turning back, he walked to the ship and was almost there when a woman wearing red stepped out from the shadows. A black dragon is no dragon at all. You know the truth. In your heart, you know the truth, the woman said, and when he moved to her, she was gone. Jon shaking it off as he made it back to the ship. He was relieved to find Aegon there, and even more so to see him in such a good mood, though not at the idea that they would be now going to Volantis. Still, he could perhaps get a message to Illyrio once they passed through their drop point in Gojia and Draho. So he played along with Aegon's happiness, ate his dinner, and tried not to shudder when Aegon had his harp lesson. The sound's not what one could call music, not truly. Laying in his bed that night, he formulated his plans and hoped, when he finally saw his Silver Prince again, he'd forgive him for them. Aegon, though, must be king, and to do that, he needed a bride who actually brought them something. One who was worthy. He'd not let Aegon make his father's mistakes, and Daenerys was already sounding far too much like Lyanna Stark for his liking. Forgive me, my prince, he said as he contemplated how they would kill Rhaegar's sister without Aegon knowing, and he hoped that Illyrio managed it so that he would not have two. The dreams that came that night were of his Silver Prince, and the music he played, the song he sang at the feast, and seeing him dance with the girl who cost him everything. My son is the true dragon. Protect him, protect him, protect them from the black dragon, Jon, he heard Rhaegar say, and then Lyanna looked to him. Protect our son, he thought she said, but he was sure he had to be mistaken. Pike, the sea bitch 295 AC, the Yuan. When he had arrived on Pike, he had been nervous, heading to the keep with Dagmar and the others. He had covered it well, but deep down inside he had been nervous. He saw the men look to him as they walked into the great keep, heard the whispers as he strolled through the great hall. There in front of them, sitting on the sea-stone chair, was a man he'd not seen in almost 6 years. Beside his father stood 2 of his uncles, Victarion and Aeron, the Lord Captain and the Damfair, both looking surprised but happy to see him. His father, on the other hand, did not. His face was set in a scowl, and he glared at him, almost making Theon wet his pants, so intense was the look. How did you get here, boy? His father asked, his voice firm and angry. I escaped, he replied a little shakily. Escaped, 6 years it took you, and we bound by our word which you've now broken, his father said. Word given to Greenlanders is not fit for purpose, he said, repeating something he heard one of the men on Dagmar's ship say. Aye, the lad speaks the truth, Badawin, his uncle Victarion said. How did you escape, boy? His father asked, not even acknowledging what his uncle said. Ban told him the same story as he did Dagmar, of stealing the horse, coin, and clothes, of taking the boat from the man and paying the iron price, of sailing down the coast until he reached Seaguard and then finding Dagmar and coming to Pike aboard the foam drinker. And where's the boat you stole? His father asked. I broke it up for driftwood so I'd not be found, and gave it back to the sea, he said, and finally saw the smile on his father's face. You have paid the iron price and come back home. I welcome you, my son. What is dead may never die. What is dead may never die, the men in the hall said loudly, Theon joining in. He received a pat on his back from his uncles, and sat with his father that night at the feast, enjoying the company of a thrall as he slept in his own rooms for the first time in years. He eventually had the discomfort of meeting his uncle, Euron, the man just as crazy as ever in Theon's opinion. Though it was moons until he met his sister and Asha was not the same girl, he remembered. You fucked up, she said as he tried not to scream while looking at his finger on the ground. You've had more experience than me, he said, draining the ale, as Aaron reached over with the burned blade and placed it on the stump where his finger had been. Theon almost but not quite passing out as he smelt the burned flesh. I am not just at finger dancing, little brother, though when you wrap that hand around your cock later on it'll be as if someone else is doing it for you, she said, laughing as he tried not to cry from the pain. It won't be my hand around my cock, sister, he said, and she laughed loudly, as did he. Over the next few moons he had begun to enjoy being an Ironborn once again, finding his sea legs, going on a trip around the islands with Asha on the Black Wind, and getting to know his sister again. He learned more about his uncles, and Asha warned him even more about Euron, telling him that the man's madness was beginning to be a problem. Be wary of the Crow's Eye, brother. You are father's heir, and he is ever resentful, she said drunkenly. One night, and he nodded before one of her thralls, a girl he had his eye on, took his sister to her bed. When the letter from the crown demanding his return came, he laughed along with everyone else when his father shouted out his response. If he wants my boy, he can pay the iron price to take him back, just like Theon did to get here. Dallin said to loud cheers, and Theon had never felt so worthy as he did right then. A few days later, he was given his own ship, Asha standing beside him as the new longship was presented to him by his father. He had hoped to call it the Sea Maid, but Asha had japed it was more a bitch than a maid, and so the Sea Bitch is what he named her. His crew were men he felt he could trust, Marin Botley and his boys, Garen Harlaw, and thanks to his uncle Remolf Stormdrunk, to steer. I've given you a ship, and you've gathered a crew. Go and prove me right to do so. Reeve and Reeve, well, boy. For the time when we show the Greenlanders the true God is soon to be upon us. What is dead may never die, his father said. But rises again harder and stronger, he replied, as he nodded to his father and walked up the gangplank of the ship. As the ship left, he stood on the bow, looking out. He had ordered the men to make for the stony shore, knowing a few small villages that would be easy pickings, just enough to give the men a taste. But there were bigger plans in his head, juicier targets, and all he needed was time, and he could get to them. His uncle had tried to take the pinnacle ships, but at sea that was apparently too hard even for the Lord Captain. Theon, though, knew where they had the best chance to get at one. The best chance to make some true coin, and when the time was right, he'd go there. He wondered how Ned Stark would react, knowing his youngest daughter was thrall to Theon Greyjoy. Wouldn't that just be the supreme irony he felt as he thought of Bear Island? Volantis 2095 AC. The Hound. Everywhere he looked, there was fire. Fire on the walls, fire in braziers. These fuckers prayed to it, stared at it, and fucking worshipped it for all he knew. It took all he had to just stand beside the princess when she looked into the flames. Even seeing the visions himself wasn't enough to make him wish to be in those rooms. Yet, each day he entered, and each day they waited. The time, it seemed, was never right, and it wasn't just Dante who was pissed off. But the food was good, the wine plentiful. He slept in a warm, comfortable bed. And apart from having to listen to the whinging of Shara fucking Seastar, a stupid name if he ever fucking heard one, all was relatively good. He and Dany sparred daily, and both even sparred with these fighting priests they had here. Dany doing better than he once the flames came out. You need to overcome your fear, he heard Shara say from behind him as he watched the princess spin and move away from the man with the spear. Easy for you to say, you ever been kissed by fire? No, I didn't fucking think so, he said grumpily. She shouldn't have said that, Shara said sympathetically. No, she shouldn't, stupid fucking cunt, he said, thinking of the stupid red priestess who was lucky he'd not gutted her there and then. Sandor, Shara said, chastising him, and he couldn't help but chuckle. You really think I'll stop my cursing because you asked me to? He asked the woman. You have, with the princess, she said, smirking. And he glowered at her before turning back to watch as Dany knocked the spear from the man's hand. While she'd not yet come even close to beating one of the fiery hand, she had better luck with some of the men who were training and hoping to be one someday. The princess practically skipped over toward them, a smug smile on her face, knowing they'd seen her beat the man. I told you I could beat him, Dee said happily. Aye, and you did, he said before Shara spoke, and annoyed the princess. Come, we have lessons, princess. I'm not in the mood, Dany said. Daenerys, you promised I'd let you spar and then you'd take your lessons seriously. Shara said, looking to him and then to her. You said I could spar with Sandor and we haven't yet. Dany said, and Shaxley nodded reluctantly. Fine, 1 more hour, and then you come, Dany. No more delays. I promise, Aunt, Dane said, and he waited until he was absolutely certain that Shiera was gone. The woman's hearing far too attuned to them. You fucking liar, he said, picking up his sword. I didn't lie, she said, smirking. You fucking did. Sandor, she said, mimicking Shiera's voice, and he couldn't help but laugh loudly. Come on, let's spar, and then in an hour, I'll drag you to her, he said, smirking at the pout on her face. In the end, he didn't have to. After a few minutes sparring, he could tell that despite herself, her heart wasn't in it. The Ancient instead was just using it as an excuse to annoy Shiafra, something they both did on occasion. More to alleviate the boredom that could sometimes set in than out of any malice towards the woman. He knew she loved the lessons the woman taught her, the tales of her family, and apart from when Kinvara would speak of her nephew, it was Dany's true favorite time in this place. Finding her standing looking out at the city from one of the balconies later that night, he heard her sigh as he walked up behind her. What? He said, when he reached her. This is boring, she said. Then stop standing here, he replied with a chuckle. Not the standing, the waiting. We must wait until the moon is right, princess. What the fuck does that mean? The moon looks right to me, she said, shaking her head. Do you want to see your dragons? He asked, reaching out to turn her to face him. You know I do, she said eagerly. Then we wait, and then we fucking leave, he said. And she smirked. My nephew. Do you think he'll be like Viserys? She asked softly. If he is, then you'll fuck him up. Will you not? He said, and she laughed. We'll fuck him up. Aye, we will, he said, and he walked with her to her room. Making his way down the corridor, he checked behind him to make sure he wasn't being followed. Opening the door as quietly as he could, when he reached it, he closed it behind him, and then he moved to the bed. How is she? Shiera asked. Bored, she wants to go. We will be soon, now. Come to bed, she said, looking at him, as she moved the sheet to one side, showing some but not all of her body to him. He undressed and moved in beside her, flinching as he always did when she reached out and touched his face. Closing his eyes, he felt her lips on his, felt her hand slide down his chest. When she touched him, he almost spent her fingers soft and graceful, and yet she was fully in control, just like it had been since she first welcomed him to her bed, and Sandor soon felt what heaven must be like. The next morning, he quickly dressed, kissing her as he left. He was under no illusions that they shared anything more than physicality. Still, he welcomed it. How she'd look at him, how she'd touch him, and just staring at her as she slept was a gift he was grateful for. River Run 2095 AC. Cat. Receiving the raven from Lysa, she couldn't believe what it said. They had knighted him. The bastard had received a knighthood from the king, no less. She couldn't believe it. Why? How? She needed to speak to Pettier, and hoped he would come to visit soon. Though she held out little hope for that, while he had come and stayed in River Run since she'd returned. It was only the once, and even then just briefly. Trying to ignore the raven, she went about her daily chores, her routine that she'd come to enjoy. While she had less power here by right than she had as Lady of Winterfell, she quickly had found that in practice she had far more. Edmure was her brother, and she loved him deeply. But it had become clear to her over time that he was not meant to be lord, and he certainly had no real interest in doing the work of one. Her brother far preferred the trappings, and it had been left to her to run the keep, and by definition the Riverlands. She started with the raising of coin. Vyman she had removed from his position, and he now acted simply as a maester. Edrir had told her she was overstepping until she had pointed out their coin situation, suddenly agreeing with her choices and decisions and leaving her to fix the problem. Rutherese was placed back in his position, even more firmly now, and between them they had reduced expenses and begun to claw back some of the coin they had been losing. In a little over a few moons, she had stopped the rot, and with a small increase in taxes, which, while they disagreed with them about, had been accepted by the lords, Cat felt that within the year she'd be in a position where they were saving, rather than losing coin. My lady, Utharides is outside, Pearl said, and Cat nodded to the girl to send him in. Utharides, were we to meet? She asked, surprised to see the man before lunch. No, my lady. It was just, I wished to bring something to your attention, he said, looking around to make sure they were alone. Please sit, she said, and he took his seat facing her. My lady, this is a most delicate matter. It has come to my attention that Master Viername has been visiting houses of ill repute, the steward said, and she looked at him in shock. But masters swear a vow of chastity, do they not? She said, and the steward nodded. Indeed, my lady, but it makes me wonder if perhaps we need to look at the books even more, and also perhaps even the maester's budget itself, Utharides said, almost whispering. You think him stealing from us? She said, her voice full of bite. I hope I'm wrong, my lady, but perhaps it's for the best if we should purchase his supplies ourselves for now. Very well, should you find more, then come to me, she said. And Utherades nodded as he moved to the door. Utherades, let us keep this to ourselves for now. It took them a week to find out the truth, and during that time, two things happened. She received a letter from Peter, telling her he would be arriving soon with news of great import. He'd rather speak to her personally on, and Wyman disappeared. She sent men to find the man and found he had gone completely. He had taken all of his belongings and disappeared. Thankfully, they were able to send a raven to the Citadel and request a new maester, even if for some time it would be the only raven they could send. Though Utherades was at least able to take ravens in and feed them before allowing them to fly back to who had sent them. When the day of Peter's arrival came, she found herself dressing in her best, her hair tied behind her head, showing off her neck, and a part of her felt foolish for doing so. Cat, you look beautiful, Peter said, kissing her hand and then her cheek. Thank you, Peter. Edmure is off hawking, so I'm afraid it's just me. Then I shall consider myself most fortunate indeed, he said, smiling. And she smiled back at him as she led him into the keep. They had a lunch prepared and ate it privately, Cat most eager to find out the news and not wishing to wait any longer than needed. When Peter told her that Ned and the children attended the tourney, she almost cried. When he told her that Lady Janelle accompanied him, she couldn't help herself and asked the question she dared not find the answer to. Ned was with Lady Janelle, she asked, her breath coming in short gasps. They were together, Cat. I did not see anything untoward. Peter said, and she felt her breathing return to normal. Though I must admit I was not around them at all times, he said, a moment later, and she found herself reaching for her glass and nodding. The children? She asked, trying to put thoughts of her husband from her mind. They looked well, Cat. Young Sansa is the very picture of you at that age, and Robb is such a fine young man, Peter said, and she smiled at that. Her children living up to her principles at least. Rosier, Brienne. Young ear is quite a, he said before pausing. Pettier? I'm sorry, Cat. Forgive me, but she seems quite a handful. She spent most of her time with the youngest Mormont daughter, and she was partly responsible for the incident with Prince Joffrey. He said, and she could see it hurt him to tell her so. How? She asked, horrified. She and the Mormont girl were playing with the wolves, and Prince Joffrey was escorting Lady Margaery through the gardens. Pettier said, and she felt her anger rise. Margaery, it was supposed to be Sansa, not Margaery. She knew they'd ruin this. She just knew it. Not Sansa? She asked, looking at him. The prince was merely being polite, Cat. That and Peter, please? She pleaded. I believe Lady Sansa was spending her time with Jon Snow, Cat, Pater said, and she saw red. She barely heard the rest of the story. Something about wolves and Joffrey standing up to protect Lady Margaery from them. It was when Peter spoke about the other bastard and the things she said to the prince that Cat rose to her feet. This girl. This is the bastard from Casterly Rock. Joy Hill. She spat. It is Cat, Petyr said, standing up and walking over to her before reaching out to take her hand in his. After that, things happened. Events moved too fast for me to control, Cat. By the time it was done, a duel was being held. Prince Joffrey had been made to look both at fault and a fool. And when it came time for the king's meeting with Ned, Cat, I tried, but Ned was insistent. Petyr, no, please tell me what happened, she asked, her eyes tearful, as she could sense what he was about to say. Ned refused the betrothal, Cat. Prince Joffrey is to be sent to ward in Dragonstone, and Sansa and he are not to be betrothed, he said, and she was glad for his arms when they wrapped around her. She felt herself cry against his shoulder, the tears falling, and only his comforting hand on her back stopping her from running from the room. When she eventually stopped, he looked her in the eye and she realized just how close they were standing together, and how it would look should someone enter the room. She moved away, but only a small distance, still close enough to touch. I did speak to the king, though, Cat, and while I couldn't fix things with Joffrey and Sansa, I did offer a solution, one which the king took full advantage of. A solution? She asked hopefully. Brandon, he and Princess Marcella are to be wed. Cat. Petyr said, and she shook her head while looking at him, seeing his smile prove his words true. They are? She asked, and he nodded, and the hug and kiss she gave him on his cheek were far happier than she would have believed herself to be able to. But a few moments ago. Thank you, Petyr. It's not Sansa, but a princess for Bran. Oh, thank you. You never need thank me, Cat. You know that, he said, brushing a stray hair from her face. You are a true friend, Pater. My truest, she said. And this time she kissed his lips before she quickly moved away. Forgive me, she said, as she walked quickly from the room. She spent the rest of the day trying to allow the fact that Brain was to marry a princess settle in, and while it filled her with joy, it felt wrong it was supposed to be Sansa. She was supposed to be queen. Going over and over events in her mind, she tried her best to put that and other things out of her head, but found herself unable to. Ned refusing the betrothal, Sansa spending time with the bastard instead of the prince, the other bastard making up lies to make the prince look bad. Try as she might, she couldn't help but see the pattern, and yet she couldn't figure out the endgame. Other than the bastard usurping her son, she couldn't see what it was that the bastard was up to. These moves made no sense to her. Brain married to a princess would mean that even should something happen to Robb, then her other son would inherit Winterfell. It was only that night she began to see it. The knighthood. This was all about the knighthood. He had tricked the king into knighting him. He had his father's ear, and so Bran would be his squire. The king would welcome it also. And once he had her boy with him, then accidents could happen. She almost ran to Petterdare's room, such was her worry, and was relieved when he opened the door and allowed her inside. He means to kill Bran, she said loudly. Who does? Jon Snow, he means for Bran to be his squire. You must help me, Patyr. It cannot happen. You must speak to the king, she said, and he nodded, looking her in the eye as she walked further into the room. I can arrange it. Would it work if it was your uncle? He asked, and had she been more attentive, she'd have seen both his smirk and the fact they were standing by his bed. Aye, the Vale. He'd be safe there, with Brendan, and with Lysa. You will help me, won't you, Patyr? Of course, Cat. You can always count on me, he said, and she allowed him to put his arm around her shoulder as they sat down on the bed. Volantis 29.5 AC. Dainty. While in a lot of ways she'd enjoyed her time with the Red Priests and even more so with her aunt. Though what relation Cher really was to her was so many times removed she couldn't even begin to understand it. It was also incredibly frustrating. She had come here for help with hatching the eggs that she spent every night curled up in bed with. She spoke to them, at times felt she could hear a voice speaking back to her, and she could certainly feel the life inside them move. But for the moons she had been here, not once was she told how to hatch them, and apart from the vision and knowing that she didn't have the items needed, not once had she tried. Instead, her time was spent reading, studying, and training, and while she had learned a lot, she still felt she was wasting time. Shatter had told her tales of her family, of her time with them in Westeros, of Bloodraven and Aegor rivers, of Daemon and Daeron. Yet it was her aunt's stories of who her nephew would be that she found the most interesting, along with Kinvara's own tales of him. When our family arrived on the shores of Westeros, it was running from an event that 300 years later people still speak of. Shiera said. The Doom? She asked inquisitively. The Doom? But why did Daenerys dream of that? And what other dreams did she have? I don't know, she said, looking to her aunt. Exley again conquered, and our family sat the throne, and for 3 centuries we have been plotted against, conspired against. We have been murdered, betrayed, and we should not have survived. But here today, we still do. I live, you live, Aemon Targaryen rests at a wall of ice, and our nephew lives. Is he really what the Red Priests say? Is he Azarahi? She asked, and saw her aunt smile. He is the prince that was promised. This I know. What other names they call him, I do not, but he is the hero eternal, the one who'll bring the dawn, and our role is to help him do so. With Kinvara, it was far more vague. She only told her that he was in Westeros, that he had already begun to plan to take their throne back, and that he was working in the shadows until it was time to reveal himself. It was who he was, though, that Dany found the most amazing. Rhaegar's son with Lyanna Stark, Prince Rhaegar felt the song deep within himself. He and Lyanna Stark were a love so true, so pure, that the world could only withstand it briefly, and so it was always doomed to end in tragedy. Kinvara said, What happened? Viserys would tell me that the wolf girl led our brother astray, and she is the reason our father and mother died and why we were forced to run and hide. Dany said, knowing now that this was obviously another one of Viserys' lies. All tales have truth in them, princess, and even that one can seem to be right. But only to a blind man. Your brother was always destined to fall. Lyanna was always destined to fall. Magic that's strong, the magic used to bring the prince to life, has a terrible cost, but one which needed to be paid. Kinvara, said her voice, never losing its calm tone. So my family had to fall so my nephew could be born, Dainty said bitterly. No, your brother and his wife did. The rest was down to the greed of men. Kinvora said, His wife? But I thought, she asked confusedly. Your family had taken 2 wives before, had they not? Though in this case, it was different. Rosier and Lyanna loved each other. True, and Elia loved another. Papers were signed, ceremonies held, though they matter not as the seed had taken root and the prince was born. What happened to him? Where was he raised? How was he not found? Where is he? She asked, and with each question her voice more eager than the others. In time we can speak on that. He is safe, he is protected, and soon he will be ready. As soon shall we, Kinvora said, and once again another lesson ended, like so many others, with Dany left with far more questions than answers. Over time, the priestess had told her little bits more. The Sword of the Morning lived and guarded her nephew's back, just as he had her brother's. She told her that when she was in Braavos, Sir Arthur had kept assassins from her door, and that, had her path been different, then she'd have gone with him. Dany at first had felt sad at that, and then not as much as she realized that, despite it all, she liked the life she led. She was bathing when the acolyte came to her room, the girl helping her to dress, as she told her that Kinvora had sent for her. Dany finding both Shiera and Sandor with the Red Priestess when the acolyte brought her to her. Something about the room seemed off, though, as if there was an energy of some sort. And when she looked to Shiera, she saw her eyes seemed even more vivid, the colors more vibrant. It is time, princess. Tonight we will see the birth of dragons, Kinvora said, and Dany felt her heart race. What do I need to do? She asked excitedly. Your eggs, you must fetch them and make ready. The ceremony will begin when the sun sets, Kinvora said and walked away. Are you sure about this, princess? Sandor asked, and she nodded, her loyal protector worried about her safety, above all making her feel loved, and so she walked over to hug him tightly before laughing at his response. Get off me, you fucking idiot, Sandor said, and even Shiera chuckled when he spoke. When she got her eggs and brought them to the large garden at the center of the Red Temple, she could feel the heat coming off them. They practically vibrated in her hands. Laying them down among the stones, as Kinvora directed her to do, she looked to the small jar of green liquid the priestess held in her hands. Inside was no more than half a wineglass full. Rosier has called us here to bear witness to the dragons being born, to see the prince's kin wake dragons from stone, Kinvora said in what Sandor always referred to as her preachy voice. A red priest then handed Dany a small knife, and Kinvora directed her to the pyre. The stones rested on. Walking over, Dany waited until she was standing over the eggs, cutting her hand. She watched as the blood dripped over them, and then was surprised when Shiera walked to her and took the knife. Her aunt too, cutting her hand and allowing her blood to fall on the eggs. When she was done, Kinvora called her to her and handed her the jar, pointing to the pyre. Dainty once again did as she was bid. She emptied the contents of the jar over the pyre, over the eggs, and she walked back to Kinvora, who called a red priest forward, the man holding a bow and arrow in his hands. Handing them both to Dainty, she watched as Kinvora moved her fingers in a circle, and then she, like the others, looked on in amazement as a ball of flame appeared in the woman's hand. The flame is lit, princess, Kinvora said, a beaming smile on her face. Taking the arrow, Dany dipped its head into the flame and then turned to line up the shot. She fired it into the pyre, and then she, Shiera, Sandor, and the others had to cover their eyes at the explosion of green fire. When she opened them, the pyre was alight, and yet the heat felt wrong. The green fire was not a natural one, she thought, as she looked at it. When the moon is at its highest, the dragons will be born, Kinvora said, and Dany nodded. It felt like an eternity until she finally felt it. The flames of what she knew now as wildfire still seemed as strong as ever. They still roared high, but she felt it. They were calling for her. They needed her, and so without a thought, she moved to the fire. She didn't hear Sandor's screams as she stepped into the flames, didn't hear his footsteps behind him, nor him being forced to the ground. She felt no heat, no warmth, and the only sounds she heard was the cracking of the eggs and the dripping of the blood from her hand. When morning came, the fire burned no longer. She sat on the ground naked. Her hair and eyebrows had burned away, and on her shoulders, and curled around her breast, they moved. Her sons, her children, her dragons, and she smiled as the Black One crawled up to look into her eyes, and she swore she heard him speak. Mother, Highgarden 2095 AC. Sam, spending time with his family, was just as he had expected it would be. His father's disappointment made all too clear, with his mother's happiness to see him being the bright spot. Dickon's still talking of things Sam really had no interest in, and Tala just happy to hear him tell her tales of life at the Citadel. Being brought into his father's room and being made stand in front of him while he worked on papers was something he knew all too well, and so was not a surprise to him. Thankfully, though, because of Marwyn, he was better able to handle it, the Maester showing it for what it was, a way to belittle and make you feel small. The mage had pointed it out to him in the Citadel, showed him how Theobald and Ryam especially did this often, while Ebros and others had no time for silly games. "You will be going back to the Citadel," his father said simple and directly, and Sam raised his head, having been lost in a dream and thinking about the ride back all the while. "Of course, father," he said, and his father just nodded and looked back down to his papers. "You have coin?" his father asked, not looking back up at him. "I do," he said, smiling. "Very well, say your goodbyes to your mother, brother, and sister before you leave," his father said, and Sam noticed that he'd left himself out of it. "Goodbye, father," he said softly, and walked out of the room, receiving no reply or acknowledgement from his father as he did so. Marwyn had left with the Lannisters and Jon Snow, Sir Jon now, along with Prince Oberyn and the Lords of the West. He had thought he'd be going with him, but the Maester and Jon had come to speak to him before they left and told him he would not. "Would you not like to spend some more time with your family, Sam?" Jon asked. I would, some of them anyway, Sir Jon," he said, and Jon chuckled. "I already hate that," Jon said, and Sam couldn't help but smirk at the annoyed look on his face. "If I'm not to go with you, then how am I to make it back?" he asked, turning to Marwyn. "Jon has arranged for you to travel as part of his family's accompaniment. They will treat you far better than I did when we traveled here together." "Samwell," Marwyn said. "I enjoyed our travel, Master," he said genuinely. "But not my snoring, Samwell," Marwyn said, and they both laughed. "Sam, there's something I need you to do for me," Jon said, and he looked to Jon, and then to Marwyn, who nodded at him. He had agreed to do what Jon asked. It was simple enough. All he had to do was just watch the Maesters as he had been doing for Marwyn. They would arrange someone to contact him in Old Town, and that was it. After saying his goodbyes to the Maester, for now at least, Jon had introduced him to his family, and despite his initial shyness, he had enjoyed spending time with them. He had spent a little time with Sansa and Margaery too after Jon's departure, surprisingly finding that it was Margaery more than Jon's sister who seemed more put out that he had left. When the time came for his own departure, he felt some tension when the king's party was to ride with them, though a lot of that disappeared. He felt when Lord Barry said he'd instead make his own way to King's Landing. Saying his goodbyes to his mother and sister were just as hard as they had been the first time. To his brother, though, not as much, and with his father, he may as well not have come back. Or at least, that was the impression he was given. He had thanked Lady Olenna for her patronage, and she had just smiled and said that one day he could pay her back, making Sam wonder how he could ever do such a thing. "Come, Sam, the carriage is leaving," he heard Bran Stark say, as he stood looking at Highgarden, not knowing when or if he'd see it again. "I'm coming. Are you riding with me?" he asked. "I am. You can tell me more of the Smiling Knight and Sardar Arthurdane, or the one about Maxleys the Monstrous and Sir Barristan." The boy said tales of knights being his thing. It was on the second day of the ride that he made the discovery, walking in the woods near where they were camped. He came across Bran, Arya, the two Reed children, and Lady Janelle sitting in a clearing. Both Arya and Bran sat with their eyes closed, and he looked on as one of the direwolves walked up to Bran and licked his hand. Hearing the branch break behind him, he turned to see the other wolf, and this one didn't look as if it was going to lick anything. "Please, please, don't eat me," he said, almost sobbing and falling to the ground as the wolf moved towards him. "Arya, call Nymeria off," the Reed boy said, and Sam watched with great relief as the wolf walked away, though he heard no call. "Please, I wasn't spying, I was just walking and I saw," he said, his voice shaky as he checked his breeches, relieved to find he'd not soiled himself. "What did you see?" Lady Janelle asked as he was helped to his feet. "The wolves? They are." "Wolves?" he asked, excited by the prospect. "You can't tell anyone, Sam," Bran said, and he nodded his agreement. "I won't. Can I stay and watch?" he asked, and Bran looked to Janelle, who said he could. He spent the rest of the day watching them. Seeing it in person was far different than reading it in the books. There were some who called it a myth, masters who said they'd never heard of such a thing, and that it was just the tales of fools. They had tried to say that tales of warging meant as much as tales of grumpkins or snarks. Marwyn, though, said he had met men and women beyond the wall who could do it, and that skin changing was well known there. That night, he was treated to an awkward meal where everyone could hear the loud boasts of the king from his tent. Sam sat with the Reeds and some of the other northern children, as the Starks had all been invited to sup with the king. Throughout the night, he and others had heard loud shouts of Sword of the Morning and how Jon was just like his father. "Gods, that man can talk," he heard one of the Mormont girls say. "Talk, drink, and grope, servants. To think he was once called the Demon of the Trident," he heard another voice say, before people began to chuckle, and he soon joined in with the laughter. By the time he got to Old Town, he felt a little sad to be saying goodbye to them all. Hearing them tell tale of fostering and of visits to be arranged made him feel left out. His father had barely allowed him to visit the other houses in the Reach, and were it not for his mother, he'd have never met any of the other children. He had never needed to ask his father the reason, and when he had started taking Dickon with him when he visited other houses, it was made even more clear. "It was nice to meet you, Sam," Bran said as he bid him farewell. "You too, Bran. Next time we meet, you'll be a knight," he said with a smile. "Really? But that won't be for years," Bran said sadly. "But when next we meet, you'll be a squire then," he said, and the boy seemed far happier with that. Walking through the Seneschal's court, he made his way to his room. Well, cell, really. Placing his belongings on the small table, he quickly headed to the library and found some books on what he was looking for. He spent the night reading of wogs and greenseers, of skin changers and shape changers. He shuddered when he read of being able to take over a man's body, and the dreams he had that night made him wet his bed. On the road to Old Town 2095 AC. Jon? Saying goodbye was the hardest thing he'd ever had to do. Even if he'd also done so the night they were wed, he'd done so privately before he'd left. And he'd then done so again publicly when they all did. Each time felt like an arrow to his heart, and apart from the last. Each time leading to him holding Margaery in his arms for quite some time. After they were wed, he'd gone back to Margaery's room with her. It was bad luck for a married couple to not share their bed on their wedding night, and his family had more than their share of bad luck, and he'd not risk more. So he had lain in her bed with Margaery resting on his chest. He had stayed awake when she slept, and as morning's first light rose, so did he. "Jon," she said sleepily. "Go back to sleep," he said, kissing her cheek. "How can I when my husband abandons me so?" she said, her lopsided smile showing. She was fully awake now. "We cannot be caught like this. Not yet," he said, and she nodded reluctantly. "I know, but soon," she said, and he smiled at her. "Soon," he said as he kissed her softly. "Goodbye, husband," she said, and he felt as if the world itself had stopped and ceased to exist. "Goodbye, wife." The second goodbye was the night before he left. Earlier that day, he had been once again called to the king's table and asked his plans for the future. "Your Grace, while I'm now a knight of the realm, I still have much to learn. I can think of no one better to teach me than Lord Jaime, and no place better to learn than Casterly Rock," he said, and Robert laughed loudly. "Aye, lad, he's taught you well thus far. You'll be needing a squire soon, though, Sir Jon." "Can I be his squire, father?" "Sir Jon, can I be your squire?" Tommen said, and he heard the yelp from the queen. "Certainly not." Cersei said loudly before she realized everyone was looking at her. "You're far too young to squire Tommen," she quickly added, a plastered smile on her face. "But when I'm older," the little boy said, and Jon felt it best to speak up now. "I'm sure when you're older, his grace will find the most worthy knight for you to squire for my prince." Jon said, and saw the king nod in appreciation at his words. "I don't want a worthy knight. I want a squire for you," Tommen said, and both Jon and the king laughed at the young boy, and possibly for the first time they laughed genuinely together. "He has you there, Sir Jon," the king said, his smile still beaming as he looked from him to Tommen. "Your grace, my prince," he said, bowing in front of Tommen, who smiled at him as he did so. Later that night, he had once again gone to Margaery's rooms, though this time with Lady Olenna's permission, along with a warning to behave as a true knight should. He had spent some time with her and once again said his goodbyes, promising that as soon as he was able, they would see each other again. He had then gone and said his goodbyes to Sansa, to Olenna, and to Alicent too. Departing that day, he had been slapped hard on the back by the king who had come to see them off. He had wished the prince and princess all the best, and whispered to Tommen that he'd take him to squire if he was allowed, something which made he boy look to him as if he was a knight from a tale or legend. Saying goodbye formally felt false to him, the courtesy felt wrong, and the protocol was annoying. He was thankful for the hugs from his sisters and from his brother, and then he looked jealously at the hug Margaery gave Loras. "Cheer up, you'll see them soon," Oberyn said later from beside him, Jon having stopped Winter for a last look at Highgarden before it was completely out of sight. He had asked Richard to come along with them, the journey to Old Town giving him enough time, he felt, to firm up his plans for the Maesters, though he found that between sparring with Loras, Cregan and Brienne, along with his cousins, the Sand Snakes more than eager to test his mettle, that he had again far too little time. He'd barely slept on the journey, waiting until he could no longer stay awake and then grabbing a few short hours. Most of his nights were spent up with Richard, making sure they could do what was needed to be done and that everything would be in place. Men weren't a problem, and some could be taken care of by others, though even those he and Richard insisted would be accompanied by their men to do the actual deed, something Wyman had agreed to most readily. "The writing is key. Do you think you can manage it, Jon?" Richard asked as they stood by the tree. "It's like drawing, Richard. So with enough practice, I can do it," he said as he was sure he could manage it. "The ravens? I can get them, but you'll have to control them. Can you?" Richard asked, looking at him. "If you get the right kind, I can make them go where they need to." "Which leaves us with the Citadel itself," Richard said. "Do we go in hard or soft?" he asked, and Richard smiled. "Both, Jon. We go in both." He was more than happy to leave it to Richard. The plan they had was sound, but like all plans, though there was no certainty of success, and there would be problems later on that they would need to deal with, but it needed to be done now, which was more than could be said of some of their other plans. The Blackfish being an area where not just he and Richard disagreed, but everyone else did also. "I know what you say of him, Richard, but as much as I wish him on my side, it's too early," he said, and saw both Oberyn and Jaime agree. "It is, but we make the moves that are in front of us. Jon, let me speak to him. Let me reappear and see his mind on things. I'd not put you in danger, and I'll not even hint at things. But let me speak to him," Richard asked. He looked to Jaime, who nodded, and to Oberyn, who shook his head, and finally he closed his eyes, trying to think, trying to reason it out. But he could not. "For now we leave it. Give me until we reach Old Town," he said, and Richard nodded. When he wasn't sparring or making plans, he was as always riding with Joy. Despite her asking him to allow her to ride the stallion that he'd won, something he couldn't do given its size, he knew she had enjoyed riding on Winter with him. He'd even persuaded Cregan, Loras, and Brienne, and his cousins to race them, using the argument that he'd need to go slower with Joy in front of him. "We can go fast, Jon," Joy said to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course we can, but if they know that, they'll never race us," he whispered back, seeing her look at him conspiratorially before she winked back at him as they all lined up. Apart from Winter's hooves hitting the ground, the loudest sound was Joy's laughter as they left the others behind. He'd had to hold on to her tightly as she moved in front of him, trying her best to turn around to see how far behind the others were and laughing even more when she saw them. By the time the others caught up with them, he, Ghost, and Joy were standing by the Mander, Winter drinking her fill and Joy trying to skip stones as he showed her how. "You are all so slow, so slow," Joy said, giggling when Loras and Cregan arrived first. "You two aren't human," Loras said, and Jon just looked to Joy before they both turned and stuck their tongues out at him, laughing loudly when he huffed. When the rest of their group caught up, they made their camp by the Mander, knowing they'd be reaching Old Town within a day or two. It would be one of their last nights sleeping outdoors. It was that night while eating with Oberyn and Ilaria that his uncle told him he'd be leaving from Old Town, rather than Lannisport. "I had thought we'd have more time," Jon said, looking to him and Ilaria. "It makes more sense to leave from Old Town, nephew, and I find I'm missing my daughters." Ilaria said longingly. "I understand. I hope to meet them one day," he said, and saw her smile. "You will meet them one day. Elia will pester you for a ride on Rhaenix, and Abella for one on Winter, while Doria and Loreza will ask for a song and a story." Elia said, her smile even broader now as she spoke of her girls. "Then I shall need to write a song more fitting for princesses of Dorne," he said, and got up from his seat by the fire to walk over and hug his aunt. "You be safe, nephew. I shall tell my daughters of their cousin and that they will meet him." "You'd not make me a liar, now would you?" Uliari said, looking to him. "Never," he said, and she kissed his cheek as she patted Oberyn's shoulder before heading to their tent. "I look forward to my girls meeting you also," Oberyn said before handing Jon a letter for Sir. His uncle said, "I'll give it to her when I return." "Aye," he said, not sure what he wanted to say to him. I will go to Yanewood and speak to Anders. Oberyn said, changing the subject. It can't happen until it's time, Uncle. Jane said, looking to him, and Oberyn just smiled. You think me a viper. Anders is even more snake than I. He'll do it when it needs to be done, and that man will suffer. Oberyn said, looking into the flames. Will this fix things with House Yaronwood? He asked curiously. Who knows? Anders is an ambitious man. Criston Cole, Reborn, Ari calls him. Oberyn said, shaking his head with a look of disgust on his face. Quentyn fostered there, didn't he? Jon said, knowing all too well the story of Criston Cole. He does, and Ander believes that a woman is not fit to rule, even though in Dorne we know the truth. Ander believes it's a man's duty to be lord, to be prince, and so he has whispered in Quentyn's ear, from when he was but a boy. Quentyn would seek to usurp his sister. Jon asked, shocked, given how much he knew family meant to Oberyn and Elia, and assuming that all Martells felt the same. Ambition is a cruel thing, nephew. It starts as a want and grows into a need. Quentyn knows he's seen as lesser than Arianne among the people by his father, by me, and so he seeks to prove himself. Add in a man who whispers in your ear, and soon his want becomes his need, and finally you can convince yourself it's for the better good, that it's the others who need you, and for them you must do what it is you wish to do. Oberyn said, and Jon watched as he raked the fire with a stick, the sparks soon flying into the air. Why do you allow them to plot so? Jon asked curiously, and was surprised when Oberyn laughed. Lords plot, men plot, women plot. Stopping them is like holding back the sea, a fruitless and pointless task. Stopping the plots themselves, should they become an issue, is far easier. And should the need arise, you only remove the plotter as a last resort. A lesson I hope I learn, Jon said, and Oberyn stood up and reached over to him, patting him on the back as he turned to go to his tent. A lesson you've already learned, nephew. They arrived at Old Town 2 days later, and he once again said his goodbyes to his uncle and aunt, to his cousins, and watched as they left on a pinnacle ship. He told Richard to speak to the Blackfish when he found the time, and that he trusted his judgment on this, something Richard seemed most happy about. He and the others boarded the Lady Joanna, and as they set sail, he found that despite feeling the loss of Oberyn and Illaria's presence, he was excited to be going home. He longed to see his son again, to see his sister. Riverlands 2095 AC. Raiden. He felt the walls closing in. Ever since Lady Catelyn had taken over, things had changed. No longer was he in charge of the coin, and no longer did he have Edmure's support. When she had put Utherites in charge of the books, he knew he was fucked. Only a fool wouldn't see how terrible their position was, and while some of it was Edmure's fault, most of it was his. So he had gathered his things, and in the dead of night, he'd snuck out. The horse he'd readied and hidden was thankfully still waiting for him. He'd rode hard and soon came to the village. Quickly, he made his way to the brothel, and he had sought sanctuary, knowing that until he was out of the Riverlands, it was the only place he could hide. As hiding places go, it was perhaps one of the best. He ate well, he drank well, and the girls kept him company. He felt no guilt over not paying them. They were his reward after all, and their boss had insisted upon it for as long as he was in his service. Vyman, too, felt it owed to him, as he had done everything Littlefinger had asked of him. Everything. You seem unable to rise, Vyman. Kara, said the young girl, doing her best, but nothing seemed to work. Leave it for now. We'll try again later, he said, and the small, dark-haired girl smiled and nodded to him as she got up from the bed. Even the sight of her nude body, her small, firm breasts, and round apple-shaped arse was not enough to rouse his member, something that was happening much more frequently lately. He had at first put it down to guilt, down to the fact he had not just betrayed his calling, but the family he had served for so many years. He had embezzled from them, set them on dangerous paths, and kept things from them, and he had helped Edmure be the fool he really was. But it was Hoster he thought most on. The old man had been kind to him, and had for many years welcomed his advice and counsel, yet he had betrayed him most of all. Poison, he had heard some say, was a woman's weapon, but no one wielded it as well as someone trained in it uses. A small dose here and there over the years was more than enough to make him sick. Enough to have people know of his illness, and then he'd use a larger one when the time was right. You wish me to end him, to take his life? He asked Littlefinger, his shock and disgust apparent in his tone. His or yours? It matters not to me at this time, but I believe you'd prefer to keep your own, would you not? Littlefinger said. Why now? He asked. He'd known this day would come, but had he now always foolishly thought he could put it off, he wondered. Because I say so, Do it, master, and do it soon. Or it won't just be access to my girls. We'll cut off. Littlefinger said, and just by looking at him, the man knew he wasn't making an idle threat. Waking from the dream, he shook the memories from his head as he got up and walked the privy. The time for regrets was long since past, though he had many. He regretted not being able to keep to his vows. He regretted falling in with Littlefinger. And most of all, he regretted the murder of an old man. It was that night that Littlefinger himself arrived, and soon he found himself having to explain to the man what had happened, how Lady Catelyn had figured out that coin was being embezzled, of how she and Uther would by now know it could only have been him to do so, and so he had run before they could ask him questions, worried that they may use stronger methods should he not speak. You think Cat would see you tortured? Littlefinger said, clearly amused by the idea. I think Uther would, and I fear she'd leave it to him, he said as he wiped the sweat from his face. What does the steward know? What will they find in the books? Littlefinger asked, his voice curious as he stared at him. Nothing. He knows nothing. As for what they'll find, they'll see the coin was taken and was spent extravagantly. Then they'll wonder why I did so, he said, and saw Littlefinger smile. That's why I prefer to work with clever men, Maester. They cover their tracks. A fool would have given them far more. Maybe even led them to me. Littlefinger said, and Weidman could hear the implied threat clearly. Then it is good I'm not a fool, is it not? He asked, staring at the man's face to judge his reaction. More than good, for not only would I have no use for you now, I'd have even less in the future. Littlefinger said, smiling at him, and Weidman breathed a sigh of relief. The future? He asked curiously. Of course, master. I have much use for a man such as you. A clever, learned man. I need such a man to overlook my operations in King's Landing. Littlefinger said, moving closer to him, You'll find the selection there even more exquisite. Let's call it a perk of the job. Littlefinger laughed, and Weidman soon laughed with him. Sitting down to eat that night, he felt the weight lift off his chest. Enjoying the meal, his head filled with ideas of the delights he'd get to sample once they got to King's Landing. He even felt the stiffness in his breeches and nodded to Cara, who smiled back at him, letting him know that she'd come to his room later. As he undressed and the girl came in, he was glad to see the wine in her hand. He took off his breeches as she poured it into a glass, and he climbed into the bed. Smiling, she handed him the glass, and as he sipped the wine, she began to undress, and he felt himself stiffen more. As her teats were exposed, he quickly drained the rest, laying the glass down. He felt it then, the loss of breath, his throat constricting, and he looked as Cara walked to the door and opened it to let Littlefinger inside. He drank it all? Littlefinger asked as Vivian struggled for his breath, his hands reaching to his throat. He did, my lord, Cara said as she put her top back on and he watched her breasts be covered up for the last time. You did well, little one. You'll prosper in King's Landing. Littlefinger said, kissing the girl's cheek. Thank you, my lord, Cara said, smiling as they both walked from the room. As he felt his last breaths, as he felt his throat constrict even more, he would have laughed if he could. Poison was indeed a woman's weapon, being the final thought he ever had. Casterly Rock 29.5 AC. Ashura. The tourney had been interesting, to say the least. She had come so close to being herself again, only to see that dream delayed for a little longer. She had seen her son accepted by his family, something that she knew wherever Brandon was, he'd be proud of her and them for. But perhaps the most unexpected, though she had known she had been feeling something for him for some time, was how she now looked at Jurion and he at her. Seeing him standing up for her son and for Dux had only reinforced what she was beginning to feel for the man. That he was good, honest, and true was something she already knew. That he was a man she was attracted to was also not a new revelation either. But that he was a man she could see a future with was... After the trial, she had spent far more time with him, even to the detriment of the tourney itself. She had found she had missed a lot of the events, and some of them she was sorry she had. And yet, she had enjoyed her time there immensely. Each outing, each walk, each time they'd sat at the same table, she'd found herself smiling more, laughing more. She was happier, and so was he as far as she could tell. They'd kissed more than once, and though it had gone no further, she felt it was only a matter of time. So arriving back at Lannisport, and when the others said their farewells to Kevin and his family, she had gone to a small house where a woods witch had set up her stall. My lady, how may I help you? The woman asked. I'm looking for some tansy, she said, and the old woman nodded before moving back to one of the shelves and coming back with a small pouch of it. You know how to brew the tea? The old woman asked, looking to her face. I know, she said, smiling, as she handed the woman the coppers she asked for. Making her way back outside, she hurried back and arrived just as they were about to set off. Finding Jaime looking around before he saw her, and he smiled as she then walked to the carriage. I had wondered where you'd gotten to, Jaime said, helping her into the carriage. I had something I needed to do, my lord. Perhaps we can speak later, she asked, her smile, making his own soon appear. I like that Liara, he said, and she nodded. It turned out that she didn't get to speak to him that night as some meeting or other had been called. As they broke their fast the next morning, he apologized to her and said he'd meet her that night instead. She allowed Joy to miss her lessons that day, the girl unsurprisingly spending the day with Jon and Cregan, while she helped Daisy with the babe and then went to the Godswood to pray. Kneeling down in front of the tree, she closed her eyes and prayed. Seeing him as if he was standing right in front of her, his beaming smile, his sparkling eyes that promised mischief, and the tears came to her unbidden. Do not cry, my love. Remember, you made me far happier than any man deserved to be, Brandon said as she reached out to touch him. As you did me, we had so little time, she said sadly, her fingers mere inches from his. But it was the best of my life. Be happy, Ash. Live for me, he sighed as he faded away. She heard the footsteps behind her and turned to see Jon standing there, looking both worried and almost shamed that he'd caught her at what was clearly a moment she'd wished to be alone. Forgive me, Aunt. I had thought no one here. I didn't mean to intrude, Jon said and turned to move away. Stay, nephew, please, she said, and she brushed some dirt from the ground with her hands as if to make a place beside herself for him to sit, which he did, but a moment later. Are you well? He asked, a note of worry in his voice. I am. I was just thinking on your uncle, she said, and attempted a smile. Not quite sure if she succeeded or not. I wish I'd gotten the chance to know him, he said sadly. He'd have loved you. A swordsman with a wolf who rides like the wind. He'd have dragged you halfway across the north, she said, and this time her smile was far more true. What would you have done, Aunt? If things had been different, what were your plans? He asked, looking to her. A small keep, a place to grow old together. Our plans were simple. Jon, the plans of two fools in love, she said, and saw him look down to the ground. I don't mean it like that, not in a bad way, but we didn't fully think things through, other than we'd be together, she said, her voice tinged with sadness and regret. I'm sorry you never got the chance for the life you both wished for, Aunt, he said, and she looked at him before reaching out and wiping the tear that fell from his eye. There is only life, Jon. We live it and we do our best. Be happy and live, Jon said, and she gasped in shock. Aunt? He asked worriedly. What? It's nothing, Jon, but yes, you're right. Be happy and live. It's all we can do, she said, and he stood up and helped her to her feet. By the time they reached the keep, they were both laughing and japing, seeing Joy and Cregan playing with Dusk while Loras and Satin sparred. She didn't notice the frown which appeared on Jon's face. Instead, it was the laughter of her son and of Jarian's daughter that she concentrated on, their happiness fueling her own even more. When she finished eating that night, she kissed her son goodnight as he went to bed and found herself and Jarian among the last to leave. Instead of walking to her room, she walked to the lift, and Jarian looked at her curiously before he followed. Taking it to the top, she soon found the night air to be far cooler than she had imagined, and she chuckled when Jarian put his jacket on her to keep her warm. What do you want from life, Jarian? She asked, looking out at the night sky. I want Joy to get everything she deserves, everything I can possibly give her. I want her to be happy and safe and to know she's loved. She does, she said, and saw him nod. But you, what do you want? She asked, as she turned to look at him. For the longest time, I wanted nothing, he said, as he reached over to touch her cheek. Now I want you, he said, and moved in to kiss her, which she allowed him to do. For tonight? She asked when she broke the kiss. Forever, he said, and she smiled as she kissed him again. She woke the next morning to find him gone from her bed, and she felt the loss immediately. Sighing, she got up and walked over to the jar. She kept the tea in and drank it down, almost dropping it when the door opened. Turning, she was surprised to see him standing there, and even more surprised at the tray in his hand. I thought you may be hungry, he said as he looked at her and the jar curiously. Thirsty, she said, putting the empty jar back on the table and smiling at him as they walked back to the bed. As she ate from the plate and drank the warmer, normal tea, she laughed. She had thought for the briefest moment that he'd left after getting what he wanted, that he'd played a game that she had long since not been a part of. But as he laughed and japed with her, as they ate and made plans, she realized that he, like her, just wished to find comfort in this world, something to make them happy. Casterly Rock 2095 AC. Marwyn. He hadn't had as much time to speak to the prince as he had hoped, either in Highgarden or on the journey back to Old Town. He did get to speak to him a little to set Sam on his way, and a little more on the ship, though he spent most of his time walking around it and looking at it with awe. How a boy had come up with it would have been enough for him to be amazed, knowing that somehow this ship was a design from Valyria. Even more so, he was excited when they reached Lannisport, finding the place far different than it had been on his previous visits, seeing more of the pinnacle ships in the dock are being built, just showing even more how much the prince had changed things. But it was reaching the rock itself which had his heart racing, knowing what was here, what he would see. Marwyn found his patience severely tested, though, the little he had anyway, when instead of going straight to the dragons, he was brought to his quarters. It's not that we don't trust you, Maester, but it's more to give them time to know you'll be coming. Jacques Slias said, and, while it annoyed him, he did feel it better to have a dragon aware of you than unaware. At dinner that night, he saw his old friend for the first time in years. Lomara was pleased to see him, to give him a smile on his face. While the others caught up, he and Lomara ate and then went out to the gardens, both men talking of their adventures before he asked the question. He most wished to know the truth of... It's true, they are real, he asked, and Lomara grinned. They are, though the prince won't allow us to study them, not completely. Lomara said, though his voice was less annoyed than Marwyn's would have been in the same situation. He doesn't trust us, Marwyn said. Given what he knows of us, do you blame him, Marwyn? That was them, not us, he said angrily. True. Give him time. He will allow us to visit, to see them, and to study from afar. Perhaps in time we can prove our worth. Lomara said, patting him on the back. It is good to see you again, old friend. I heard you have been helping them with their investigations. I did, knowing what they've done. We're lucky it's just the guilty he seeks to punish, he said, still feeling a little upset about the fate of his former brothers. And yet, punishment is what they deserve. I can sense your hesitancy, old friend. But they wished me dead. Should they know of you, then they'd wish it for you too. You have the right of it. Come, let's get drunk, he said. And the other man laughed. He woke the next morning with a heavy head, and so he made his way to Jardine's rooms, surprised that the Maester hadn't come to see him the night before. Arriving at his rooms, he saw just what kind of a boon he'd given to his former student. Not just prestigiously, but support-wise, this was perhaps the best place a Maester could be appointed to. Forgive me, Archmaster, I was lost in my work and so didn't come down for dinner last night, had I known. Janel said apologetically. That's quite all right. Many is the time I got lost in a search for knowledge. I came for the morning cure, he said, and Jardine got up from his table and grabbed the herbs, mixing the liquid and pouring him a glass. As he did so, Marwyn looked over the man's work, seeing some drawings of the wind wheels and some pumping system he'd not seen before. He was almost lost in it by the time Jardine came back. This is most impressive, Jardine, most impressive indeed, he said when the man handed him the glass, which he quickly drank down. I cannot take credit, Archmaster. I'm just refining it for here. Master Lewin of Winterfell came up with the plan, and Jon Snow designed the wind wheels, I believe. Still an exciting project. Your time here, you have enjoyed it, he asked, putting the empty glass on the table. I am, Jardine said, and Marwyn smiled at him, patting him on the back. Good. I shall be here for some time. I look forward to working with you, my friend, he said, his voice eager. And I with you, Archmaster. That evening after eating, he was approached by Lomara, and a woman wearing the red robes of Rocklor. The woman was striking, her red hair the color of fire, and she wore an incredible ruby around her neck, one which he found himself drawn to immediately. Hearing her voice, so soft and seductive, he almost for a moment felt under a trance, and knew he would have much need of the local brothel during his time in the West. Marwyn, this is Melisandre, a servant of Rhaegar and friend of Jon's. Lomara said, My lady in honor, he said, smiling at her, which she returned. I have heard much about you, Marwyn, the mage. Come I am to bring you to see that which you've traveled so far for, she said, and he jumped up like an excited child. Taking the lift down to the bottom, he found himself walking through vaults. They reached a huge door, and he saw the prince's giant guard standing at it. Once they went through, he was led out through a corridor and past some rooms. Whose rooms are these? He asked. The prince and some of his friends, along with myself and my guards, reside here, Melisandre said. You have known the prince for long, my lady, he asked. I've been serving the prince for many years, Marwyn, but I know him personally just a little over one. You are from Essos? He asked, trying to place her voice. Essie, she said, catching him by surprise. He would have said more, but as they had walked past another door, he found he was standing in a cove. Walking through the sand, he saw the prince standing by the edge of the sea, the waves almost but not quite reaching him. For a few moments, he couldn't quite see what it was the prince was looking at, before Geo called him over and directed him where to look. The smaller one is Rhaegar, my son. The larger is Rhaenys, my sister. Jon said, and pointing out to two small shadows in the distance. Marwyn looked out, seeing the shadows grow larger and larger, and then he dropped to his knees as they finally flew over him, his eyes wide open and his smile larger than it had ever been. Dragons, he said, and heard the prince laugh. Aye, dragons, Marwyn. Highgarden 2095 AC. Margaery. Ever since he'd left, Margaery had both felt like she was the happiest girl in the world and the saddest. She was married, Jon and she were married, and at times she longed to shout it out so the world could hear, so they knew that she was his and he was hers. Yet at other times she would turn to speak to him or go looking for him, only to find he was not there and her mood would turn. It was becoming noticeable. Her grandmother, mother, Westeros had all inquired if she was well, and so she had told them some of the truth, how she was just missing Jon and Loras, and they had accepted that. Sansa, on the other hand, had not. At times, Margaery felt the girl to be watching her as closely as Fang did, looking at her with eyes that were remarkably wolf-like. She had come so close to telling her more than once also, just sitting in their embroidery lesson, or today, as they went hawking with Willis, she had come close to just blurting out that she and Jon were married. I thought I was the warg, Sansa said, and Margaery turned to look at her. Seeing both Willis and Sansa standing there with grins on their faces. What? She asked, having not been sure what Sansa had said. I said I thought I was the warg, yet it seems it's you who's lost herself to the birds. Sansa said, and Margaery shook her head. I was just thinking, she said, turning away. Whatever could it be that's on your mind, Willis? Do you have any idea what it is that has Margaery so distracted? Sansa said, her voice playful. I do not. I've been trying to find out. Has something happened in the last few days? Has someone perhaps left? Willis said with a grin, and she scowled at them both before she turned to speak to Mira. She knew they were just teasing, and she wasn't even angry or upset with them, which thankfully they noticed, both of them ribbing her as they moved to the cages. When the hawks were set free, they soon began to race after them, though Margaery rode far more carefully than her grandfather had, something their grandmother insisted upon. Soon it became clear that Sansa was cheating, and while there was no coin on the day, well, as she could see, was a little annoyed at it, though her brother hid it well and smiled when Sansa's hawk won the day. It was later that night, when she and Sansa were alone, that Margaery felt the need to bring it up. You shouldn't have warged today, she said. And Sansa put down her sewing and looked to her curiously. Why? Sansa asked, moving closer. I think my brother wished to show off his skill, prove his training of the birds, and you put him to shame. Margaery said, though, seeing the upset on Sansa's face, she explained further. I don't mean it as harshly as that. More he wished to impress upon us, and you didn't allow him to. I didn't mean, I just thought. Sansa said, clearly more upset than Margaery had intended. I know, as does Willis. It's just that others do not, she said, looking to her friend. Oh, Sansa said, realizing how it may have looked. I'll speak to Willis on the morrow. No, don't. He'd not like it to be known. I know my brother, she said, and Sansa looked at her. As I do mine, Sansa said, and it caught Margaery by surprise. I don't understand, she said, staring the other girl down. Something happened, something between you and Jon. He was sadder when he left, and you have been too. It's nothing, Sansa, she said. Though she saw that Sansa didn't believe her. It's different now. Me and Jon, we're different, she said. And Sansa looked at her closely, a frown appearing on her friend's face. You no longer like my brother? She asked accusingly. I love your brother. I've always loved him, she said. And Sansa smiled and how quickly she moved to hug her, then allowed her not to say any more. He loves you too. I can see it. That's why he was so sad. But you'll see each other soon, and one day you could be married. Sansa said, and Margaery gasped. You could be Queen, Margaery. You'd make a good queen and Jon a good king. She came so close them to telling her to just letting it all out, explaining what had happened and telling her of how happy she was that it did. Had someone asked her the next morning why she hadn't, or how she hadn't, then Marguerite wouldn't have been able to tell them, but somehow she managed to keep it to herself. She lay in her bed that night, the drawing of her and Jon dancing in one hand while the other played with the pin he gave her. The blue and green gems sparkling in the candlelight. Placing it on the table, she leaned forward and, closing her eyes, kissed the drawing before blowing the candle out. As she moved to put the drawing on the table, she brushed her finger over the sharp edge of the pin and felt the prick and jumped up. Relighting the candle, she looked to her finger to see the blood pool at its tip and looked for a handkerchief and some water, soon cleaning it up. She picked the pin up and looked as the blood seemed to disappear before her eyes seemed to be soaked up by the gems. And she blinked once, twice, and looked again, seeing it was still there. Cleaning it, she placed it back before she put the candle out and turned over to sleep. The glade was empty as she moved through it. The weirwood tall and true, and she looked to see Jon standing there. He was taller, older. His hair was longer and his body more filled out. She moved towards him and he turned and smiled. The red three-headed dragon pendant clear even in the dim light of the glade. "I knew you'd come," he said, and she found herself lost in his touch as he reached his hand out to brush it against her face. "Always. Jon, what is this place?" she asked. "This is our place, my love, a place for us to be who we truly are," Jon said, and as his fingers wrapped around her own, she looked at the ring on his hand. The ring was the Targaryen sigil, the three-headed dragon, though quartered, and she had never seen Jon wear it before. Nor had she ever seen him so clearly dressed as what he was, a dragon. When he moved in close, she felt his lips on hers, felt his hands as they wrapped around her, and next she knew they were leaning against the tree, her head resting against his own. "I must go soon, my love. The fight is almost here," Jon said, and she looked at him, willing him to stay. "I don't want you to fight," she said, shaking her head. "Yet fight I must. I will win, and I will see you soon. Farewell, my love," she heard his voice say as she found herself alone in the woods. Waking the next morning, she felt strange, odd, and as she got up from her bed, she felt a little woozy, calling for her maid. She almost fell back onto the bed. The fever lasted a few days, and when she recovered, her mother, grandmother, and Sansa were all by her beside, looking at her with relief and concern. "Get Lamas now," her grandmother said, as soon as she saw her eyes open. "Grandmother, I'm well," she said, though her voice was scratchy, and she coughed before Sansa handed her some water. "We'll be the judges of that, my dear," her grandmother said. "How long?" she asked, when she finished drinking the water. "Almost a week," Sansa asked, taking the mug from her, her worry clear on her face. "I felt well, Sansa, truly," she said, reaching her hand to the girls. After Lomis examined her, he told everyone that the fever had broken, and apart from needing some proper food and some rest, she was all but recovered. He soon left, and she sat with her grandmother and mother, while Sansa organized some food. All three of them were awfully quiet, while they waited and no one really said anything to her until the meal was brought and she'd eaten some. "You truly feel well, sweetling. You're not just saying it to reassure us?" her mother asked, her hand touching her forehead and checking to see her fever had truly broken. "I'm well for true," she said, smiling at the three of them. "Good, then perhaps you'll explain," her grandmother said, her tone abrupt and to the point. "I don't know what happened, grandmother. I felt no illness, and then I just did," she said. "I was surprised that didn't seem to reassure anyone." "Not that. You can explain what you meant when you called out for your husband," her grandmother said, and as Marguerite looked at them, she knew she hadn't kept the secret at all. Casterly Rock 295 AC. Jon, arriving back, he had immediately gone to see Rosiance and Rhaegar, finding both dragons awake in the cave, and both eager to see him. His son even spoke to him, almost chattering on like an excited child, telling him of everything he had done while On was away, and how his rider had stayed with him often. Rosiance, on the other hand, was less enthusiastic, less forthcoming, and for a while Jon didn't understand. "Have I done something wrong?" "You risked yourself," she said angrily. "I'm always at risk," he said, laughing, trying to make light of things. "But you risked yourself. I feel it, little brother. I feel what you do, just as you feel me. You risked yourself unnecessarily, even after you promised me," she said, and he couldn't help think that watching a dragon turn its head from you was a daunting sight. "I'm sorry, sister. I didn't understand," he said, and she snorted. the wind from her nostrils enough to blow sand in his eyes. Truly I didn't, he said, wiping it from his face. And now you do, or you think by telling me that I'll believe it so, she said, her annoyance still clear. I do, I'm married, sister, I have a wife, he said, and her head moved so fast she actually knocked him to the ground. What? She said as she pressed her head to his chest, keeping him on the ground. He told her then of what had happened at the tourney, of how the prince had acted, of his present, and finally of marrying in front of the heart tree, of saying the vows and meaning the words. She looked at him, her purple eyes filled with an expression he couldn't quite make out. And then he felt it, her joy, her happiness, and it was overwhelming. I felt that I didn't know what it was. Little brother, it was you. That was how you felt, she said. I didn't know. I feel things, but It's you, he asked, surprised. We are bonded. Sometimes we feel each other. More so when we're close. You know this, she said, surprised. I just didn't think. Over the distance, I didn't think, he said. And he had a realization. Then one which worried him greatly. Jay, she asked, her voice concerned. If I'm hurt, you could be hurt. I could hurt you, he said, and she didn't answer, and he knew then it was true. The bond was that strong. I'm sorry, sister, I'm so sorry, he said, leaning his head against her own. He explained then how he'd been told off by Ilaria, and how he had come to realize how things were, though he left out that knowing Rhaenys could feel his pain now only reinforced it. He went and ate and met with Jaime, Tyrion, and Tyrion, before speaking to Marwyn and Lamara, the two men seeming pleased to see each other after all this time. He met briefly with Melisandre, asking to speak to her on the morrow, keen to find out what he could about Thoros before Beric came to visit. Meeting with his aunt had been strange, and he hoped he had been somewhat comforting, though he knew he was offering very little wisdom to a woman who'd seen far more of the world than he. It was with Tyrion that he spent the most time other than the dragons, keen both to be with his uncle and also for his help. I need your help, uncle, he said, sitting at his uncle's desk. Anything I can do, just ask it of me. Jon, I can't do it all on my own, uncle. I've realized it, and I find that even when I do, I end up just doing it anyway. You have, Jaime, Tyrion said, his voice a little affronted. I don't mean it like that. I'm not doing anything on my own, and yet I'm doing too much on my own. It's hard to explain, he said, and Tyrion looked to him. Try, nephew. Jaime is my hand, he Oberyn. Jaina, Olenna, Ygarian, Kevin, Richard, and Wyman, all of you make moves and do things that further my cause, which gives me time to do other things, but instead of using that time wisely, I end up just filling it with yet more things, jumping to other things that need to be done, and getting deeper into plans that need to be made, he said, his voice full of frustration. What is it you want, Jon? Tyrion asked. I need someone to act for me, someone to make certain choices without needing to come to me first. Jaime can do so many, but I need someone else. I need family, he said, looking to him. The next few moons are going to be busy. Uncle Rhaenys wishes to fly. It's only a matter of time until she does, and when she does... Jon, Tyrion looked at him worriedly. There are things I must do, places I must go. With Rhaenys, I'll soon be able to. I may not be here as much as I am now. Then Jaime as you hand can act in your stead. That's his role, Jon, Tyrion said. It is, but he's also Lord of Casterly Rock and Warden of the West. He's a Father Tyrion. Jaime is my hand, but the hand is a full-time role. And while in the future he'll have to do so, for now, I'd like him to be able to have a life also. But for me you don't, Tyrion asked, and Jon for a moment didn't see. He was japing before he laughed with him. Welcome to my world, uncle, he said, and Tyrion laughed a little louder. We'll all speak on this, Jon, but you, me, and Jaime need to speak on it privately first. Thank you, uncle. For this, for staying with them when I was gone, Rhaegar is happier than I had thought he could be. And Rhaenys appreciated it, too, he said, smiling, showing his relief and appreciation. I was happy to do so. But there was a problem, Jon. Tyrion frowned. There was? He asked, looking to his uncle, who shook his head. Not an insurmountable one, but Bronn knows the truth of you, Tyrion said, and raised his hand. When Jon went to speak, he's trustworthy. Jon, God's help us. But he wishes to serve, wants a castle for himself in the future. Tyrion chuckled. A castle? He asked, surprised. He's a good man. He's been a good help to me. Well, maybe this is one of the things you can take off my shoulders then. Jon said, smirking, and Tyrion laughed. Oh, why thank you, nephew. Howsoever can I repay you? his uncle said sarcastically. I didn't mean it like that, but you need a sworn sword, uncle. Someone to watch your back. Bronn is more than capable, and should he prove worthy then, a keep isn't out of the question, he said, and Tyrion laughed loudly. My thoughts exactly, which is why he is my sworn sword, nephew, Tyrion said. At least it's one less person to keep the truth from, he said, a moment later. About that, Jon saying is suspicious. I'd say Brienne is too. It may be time to tell them. I know. I'll speak to them both soon, he said, standing up and turning to leave. I hear a princess may be coming to visit, he said, looking at his uncle's face and seeing it blush. Obviously, Bronn didn't get the message about keeping things to himself, Tyrion said. Actually, it was Ilaria, she said. You and Princess Arianne hit it of uncle. Jon, life, uncle, is far too short. We should find whatever happiness we can and grab hold of it, he said, smiling as he thought of his own happiness and pictured her golden brown eyes. She is a princess, nephew, Tyrion said, dejectedly. A prince of House Targaryen, my uncle and a future dragon rider, a good enough match for anybody, and a good man who any woman would be lucky to call a husband, he said, his voice as true as he could make it. I'm not telling you what to do, uncle. I'm telling you that whatever you decide, I want you to know that I'm with you all the way. Thank you, Jon, Tyrion said, smiling. Sir Jon, I have a title now, he said, as both of them laughed. He read Jorah her story that night, and after he was done, he met with Jaime and Tyrion. While they didn't fully agree to anything they did, speak up on the plans for the future. Jaime was actually happy to have Tyrion even more involved in them, and though they needed to figure things out even more, mainly how both sets of duties to the crown and to the rock would work, he felt better for even moving in that direction. Watching as Rhaegar and Rhaegar flew over the water, as they dropped down to feed, he felt them both in his head. His son was showing off, spinning in the air, and dropping as deep into the water as he could, coming back up a few moments later with a large fish in his jaws, while Rhaegar was calmer, more focused, and just seeing her fly in the moonlight, seeing the light reflect off her, he could see just how beautiful and majestic she truly was. It's time, Jay. You know it's time. I know, tomorrow, he said, and felt her joy almost overwhelm him. Tomorrow, little brother, tomorrow we fly. Casterly Rock 2095 AC. Rosiers! He was happy to be back, his room, his view, in the years he had stayed at Casterly Rock. The place had become his home. He, Jon, and Joy were family. Cregan, Brienne, the friends he had always wanted, and Satin. Satin was. He wasn't sure what Satin was to him. A friend. Yes, at first he had thought him to be like Jon, someone that he'd be that close to. Over time, though, he had begun to notice the differences. How he looked at Satin was not how he looked at Jon. How he behaved around him was not the same. It scared him, terrified him at times. And at others, he found himself overwhelmed by it, by feelings he wasn't sure he fully trusted. While in Highgarden, as much as he had enjoyed it there, happy though he was to be with his family and to compete in a tourney, he was sad also. It had taken him coming back to the West to realize what it was that he was sad about, what it was he missed most about the Rock. Had he been more intuitive, he'd have realized it sooner. Jon, Joy, Cregan, Brienne, they were all with him. His true family and the one he'd made for himself were all there. Satin was not, and it was he that Loras missed every day. He was in Highgarden. Are we going riding today? He heard Joy ask Jon, seeing his friend shake his head. Not today. Cregan can take you if you really want, and you and I can go on in a day or two. Jon said, and he saw Joy nod before she moved over to work her charms on Cregan. He was soon laughing, as the boy, like Jon usually did, folded and allowed Joy to get her way. What are your plans? Satin asked, and Loras looked at him, feeling that nervousness he was feeling all too much around him lately. Nothing really. I had intended to spar, and we have our lessons, Loras said, only for Jon to interrupt. Actually, I was hoping to speak to you, Satin. You too, Brian, Jon said. And when Loras looked into his friend's face, he knew what was about to be told to them. He saw Jon give him a nod and a small smile, which he returned. There goes my plans to do nothing, Satin said to laughs around the table. Satin's duties had increased a lot while he'd been gone. Now with Tyrion, the boy spent hours working as a squire, far more than he did as a maid's. Though he too was doing more, as he was his only one now, Jon, being a knight, was not able to do his usual duties anymore, and was technically acting as a maid's guard. Though he knew, if anything, it was the other way around. He had been furious when Jon came to him after being knighted, his friend apologizing both for the knighthood itself and for leaving them alone on the field. "I should have been there with you, I'm sorry," Jon said. "It was a fight, attorney Jon, we got outnumbered, but this is why we fight in them. We live and learn and fight another day." Lord Yak said. The words were Arthur's, though, and not his own. "I know, but had I been with you, had I been close," Jon said, his voice full of regret and self-recrimination. "I'm supposed to take care of you, not the other way around," he said angrily. "What? If I wish to be a Kingsguard one day, and I do, then I'm supposed to take care of you. You're the king, Jon. You shouldn't be worrying about us, not at the risk to yourself. You're my friend. You needed my help," Jon said loudly. "I did not need your help," he shouted. "Gods, you can't fix it all. We have to do things for ourselves, too. I want to improve, get better. How do I do that if you fight my fights for me?" he said, breathing deeply as he tried to calm himself. "I wasn't," Jon began, but he interrupted. "You were, damn it, Jon," he said, walking away. They had made up less than an hour later, the fight, if you could call it that, all but forgotten. And yet he had made sure he reiterated what he said. Jon nodding that he understood. It wasn't just the idea that he needed to be protected that bothered him, but that it was Jon who was doing it. He was the king. It was his job to protect him, and so he vowed to double his efforts when he got back, and planned to train even harder in the future. He intended to go to train now, but as Jon stood up and Brienne and Satin joined him, he was pleased when Jon asked him to come along too, glad he could be there when he spoke to them both. Taking the lift to the bottom, they, Ghost and Sir Arthur, walked into the vaults, and Jon took them to his room, asking them all to sit before reaching down to rub Ghost. "I haven't been completely truthful with you both. I have had my reasons, and when I explain, you'll understand. It wasn't a lack of trust, more gods. I don't even know what it was," Jon said. "What is it, Jon?" Brienne asked. "My name isn't Jon Snow. It's Jaehaerys Targaryen, true-born son of Rhaegar and Lyanna Targaryen," Jon said to gasp from Satin Brienne, only Satin noticing that he didn't make a sound. "The rightful king of the Andals, Rhaegar and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, protector of the realm," he added as all three looked to him. "You intend to go for the throne?" Brienne said, her voice showing her shock as much as her expression did. "I do. What you know of the rebellion is based on lies, untruths spread by people who wish to see my family fall. Robert Baratheon never loved my mother. You've seen him how he acts. He's no different now than when he was when supposedly trying to rescue the love of his life." Jon said, his disdain for Robert clear. "That's why," Brienne said, and he and Jon looked to each other before they looked to her. "That's why you were so upset when he knighted you." "You noticed?" Jon asked. Aye, I did. I thought it strange, but it makes sense to be knighted by a man who shamed your mother so." Brienne said, and yet Loras found his attention drawn again to Satin, who still sat silently. "There is something else. I have dragons," Jon said, and both Brienne and Satin looked at him, now their expressions clearly showing their disbelief. After Jon explained more, after he told them some, but not all of it, he brought them to see the dragons, both reacting pretty much how he expected. Brienne, though, seemed to take it better than Satin, her knightly code, her chivalric nature appealed to by Jon's story, while Satin seemed to be lost, almost unable to grasp what was being said and what this meant for the future. Both, though he was glad to see, quickly offered Jon their support, Brienne going so far to bend to her knee and pledge fealty. While Satin did likewise, he did so differently, and even when Jon offered them to move their rooms down here, Satin accepted almost in a daze. Whereas Brienne seemed excited by the prospect of sharing rooms with her friends, it was later that night, as he helped Satin bring his things from his room, that he finally got the chance to speak to him. "You've been quiet all day," he said, and Satin glared at him, shaking his head. "Satin, speak to me. How am I supposed to react? I just found out that there's a hidden king among my friends. He has dragons and plans to take the throne. Whatever that means. Oh, and if that wasn't enough, I find my other friends have been keeping it from me." Satin said, his annoyance clear. "It wasn't my secret to tell," he said as softly as he could. "What does this mean, war?" "A council? What?" Satin asked, his concern clear. "Robert would never go for a council," he said, and saw Satin sigh. "So it's to be war. And who fights in it, Jon?" "You?" he asked, and Loras saw him sit on the bed, and so walked over to sit beside him. "Aye, I'll fight for him. He's my friend, my king. If he were to ask it of me, I'd fight. he said, and was surprised at the look on the other boy's face, not sure exactly what it was he was seeing. "I don't want you to fight," Satin said softly. "We have to fight. Jon is the king. The realm needs." Lozier said emphatically, "I don't want you to fight," Satin said more determinedly, and Loras turned to look at him. The two of them sat there on the bed. Loras, looking at Satin in the look of worry and concern on the boy's face, made him reach out to touch it. Brushing his hair away from his cheek, he rested his palm and felt Satin lean into it. What came over him? He didn't know. Seeing the look on Satin's face, feeling his cheek under his hand, or whether it was the need in his eyes. Before he knew it, he had leaned forward, and as he drew closer, he saw Satin look to him. He had never kissed anyone before, other than Margaery, on the cheek or his mother when he said goodbye, but he'd never actually truly kissed anyone before. As his lips met Satin's, he felt it deep inside of him, as the boy's mouth opened as their tongues touched. He almost fainted, such were the feelings inside of him. When he broke away, when he tried to get control of the sensations he was feeling, he saw the brief look of hurt on Satin's face. "Lozier," Satin said, and he didn't let him finish, his lips finding Satin's once again. The North and Winterfell 2095 AC. When they took sail from Old Town, he almost felt it when they hit the northern shores, the change in temperature, the smell of the air. He knew he was back in the north long before they saw Cape Kraken. They had passed Lannisport and Casterly Rock, Ned along with Arya and Bran looking to the imposing features of the keep high on the rocks. Arya excitedly telling Bran that was where Jon and Cregan were, and he trying not to laugh when Bran said he knew that. Traveling to Old Town, they had passed here at night and had been unable to see it clearly, something he was glad for now as the children's excitement fueled his own. It had been a far shorter journey than it should. The Pinnacle ship almost gliding through the waves, and yet they were still perhaps a moon away from reaching Winterfell. Though he was thankful for his company, speaking to Howland and the Great Jon, to Madge and her girls, making the hours pass even more quickly. Howland even helped him master his warging, still not as easily as Arya and Bran were finding it. But he could see through Leai's eyes, smell and sense what she did, and it was mind-blowing to him. The problem was, as busy as he was, as much as he tried to do to keep himself occupied, most nights he found sleep to be evasive, and he'd end up standing on the deck looking out to the stars. Something he was doing tonight when he heard the footsteps behind him, turning to see Elle walking towards him. "Can't sleep again?" she said, handing him a mug. Warm cider he found to his delight. "Aye, too much on my mind," he said, sipping the cider. "Care to talk about it?" she asked, and his initial thought was to say no, though soon he found himself sharing things he'd not thought he would. While he didn't tell her everything and for now kept the truth about who Jon was and what Cat had tried to do to him to himself. He found himself unburdening far more truths than he had intended. Tales of Cat's hatred of Jon, of how she feared the boy was plotting against Robb, to finally speaking on Littlefinger and the letters and almost waiting with bated breath to see if she would curse him down or tell him he had done the right thing. To his surprise, she did neither. Instead, she simply told him what he needed to know. "No one can know if they did right or wrong by your children. You've done right, Ned. They're happy, content, and they're learning how to be Northerners, something they should have been doing for a long time," she said, smiling. "And Cat," he asked, "only your heart can tell you what it feels. What anyone else says or thinks means nothing compared to that." Elle said as she touched his arm and walked back below decks. He found himself sleeping far better after that. She'd not tried to placate him and tell him he was right, only told him to trust how he felt and in his heart, and he knew then he had done the right thing. When they reached Bear Island, he along with the children, the Great Jon and Howland were invited to stay, and he welcomed it. Arya even more so than he. The island was very different from how it had been when he'd first come here many years ago. He had seen it briefly when they'd taken the ship from there to leave, but now he got a chance to take a much better look. And so he took full advantage of it. The docks were almost built. The area which served as the collection point and delivery point for their timber and furs, even larger than the keep, which now served it. While still made of wood, work had started on the proper keep. Madge's keep being made to her design, and Ned felt just how much the woman looked forward to ruling her own castle. The sheer number of men on the island, though, shocked him as much as anything else, a small village almost needing to be built to house them all, and it made him even keener to see the north expand. "It's remarkable, is it not?" Howland said as they, Jirya, the Great Jon, and Meg rode the hills overlooking the docks, Leia running off ahead of them. "Aye, it's truly an incredible job you've done here, Jirya." Ned said, seeing the proud look on both Jorah and Mage's faces. Mega tells me you wish to improve the roads? Jorah asked. Aye, we saw them in the Reach, how quick and easy they are to travel. So we intend to fix the trade routes first, and then the roads between the keeps, he said, as they rode down the hill. It'll cost a lot of coin, Ned, the Great Jon said. We'll all contribute. It'll be worth it. Jon, when it's done, the trade, the coin we earn, by the gods, we should have done this sooner, he said to Nods. They feasted the last night they were there, Arya sad to say goodbye to Lyanna, but excited knowing that she'd be coming here within the year. And Ned finding himself dancing far more than he ever did. He danced with Lyness and Lyra, though mainly with Ellen. He found himself even spinning her once or twice, especially after she had laughed the first time he did so. Saying his goodbyes, firstly to the Mormonts, was hard, and as they rode to the King's Road, it got even harder, knowing he'd be saying his farewells to the Umbers and to Howland soon. Howland he found to be as enigmatic as ever, always looking as if he knew more than those around him, and to Ned's mind, he always did. The night before they were to part, he and his old friend had the strangest conversation, Howland once again speaking on things he didn't understand. When he gets lost, he'll need you, Ned. He'll need you to bring him back, to show him the path, Howland said, as they sat in front of the fire. Jen. What do you mean, lost? You'll know it when you see it. Be there for him. Bring him back, Ned. He's needed here, not there. Bring him back, Howland said. The West? Are you talking about the West? He asked, looking at Howland, who shook his head. He won't lose himself there. He'll lose himself here, Howland said, pointing to his head. And here, he said, pointing to his heart. Bring him back, Ned. Talk to him and speak of her. Tell him of his mother, Howland said as he stood up, reaching his hand onto his shoulder. He nodded at him before walking to his tent. They said their farewells the next morning, and it was only the next day, as they were riding along the King's Road, that it hit him that Howland should be riding with them. Asking El later, he found that his old friend was heading to Last Hearth, and he chuckled when El told him that Jozin sought a match with Lyra Umber. Though it was far too early for an official betrothal, he found he quite liked the idea of those two houses joined. When they finally saw the walls of Winterfell in front of them, after what felt like the longest travel of his life, he smiled, looking to see that his children and Elstu seemed happy to be home. Benjen welcoming them as soon as they got in the gate and staying with them for another week until he needed to head back to the Wall. He made sure he gave him as many supplies as he could spare to take to Jir in the Night's Watch. He was sitting praying in the Godswood when it came to him. The thought was one he couldn't shake. People leave, always, and no matter how much you wish them to stay, they leave, and you never have the time you wished to share with them. The Mormonts, Umbers, Howland, all had left on this journey back. Benjen now had gone too. Soon his children would leave, and what then? With no children to be the governess for, would Elle need to leave? Would she need to go back to her father's keep? Did he want her to? The answer to that one was clear, at least. Rising to his feet, he turned to walk back to the keep, and was surprised to see Lie and Elle standing there. Elle looking to him, and he to her, the wolf watching them both. He closed his eyes and went looking for the door. Soon and found himself inside, feeling what his wolf was trying to tell him, what she had tried to tell him so many moons ago. She is back, Lad said in his head, and as he opened his eyes, he smiled as he moved to them both. Dorne 2095 AC. Oberyn? He had missed Dornish food, Dornish weather, and mostly he missed his girls. He laughed loud and true as Doria splashed about in the water, Tying holding her up as she did so. Alaria held Loreza, their little girl too young to swim on her own and content to be held by her mother, her hand splashing the water as he mimicked her older sisters. Beside him, his brother watched on happily, Doran always at his best when watching the children play. You had fun then? Doran asked. Not as much as I'd have liked, but I had fun. Seeing the stag fawn over a boy who'll bring him low is most enjoyable, he said as he swallowed a date. He has no suspicions? Doran asked. If he did, then Jon would be dead, or we would be at war. Oberyn said simply, and he knighted him, you say, Doran said with a chuckle. He shamed him to be knighted by the stag. Had Jaime Lannister not acted then, I would have. You really care that much for the boy? Doran asked, making Oberyn smile as he turned to him. He is Yaxir. He is a Diaz child, as much as Rhaenys or Aegon would have been, so he is my nephew. I've spoken to my niece, brother, heard the words from her own mouth. A dragon's, though it is. He is our kin, and soon to be our king, he said, and saw Doran nod. Arianne wishes to see him, to see Rhaenys, Sarala. I've told her she may go. I'll be heading to Sunspear. Brother, I wish you to be by my side. I will, but not for some time, brother. It's to Yornwood I must go, Oberyn said, and saw the concerned look on Doran's face. Oberyn, his brother said warningly. Fret not, brother. It's to right a wrong, not to cause another. I go, he said, laughing, as Lorzia slapped both hands down into the water. Splashing Ilaria, he rode out a few days later, he, Daemon, and Oberyn, along with his guards. Quentyn, too, had joined him, eager to see his friends once more. While traveling by sea may have been quicker, he had missed the freedom the desert allowed, and so they rode fast, but not hard. Arriving to very mixed welcomes, Quentyn being treated a prince and a long-lost friend, while he was treated respectfully but not friendly. Cletus, Quentyn, and Archibald, along with Jairus Drinkwater, all headed off to catch up and spin tales, no doubt, leaving him alone with Anders with Sir Daemon standing close and watching quietly. He and the Blood Royal had a checkered past, being blamed for the killing of the man's grandfather, and Oberyn, knowing the man's ambitions, having ensured they rarely saw eye to eye. But given why he'd come, what he knew and what he knew Anders would do with that knowledge, some of that at least would be forgotten. I had not expected you, my prince, Anders said as they walked through the keep. I had not thought to come, but a pressing matter caused me to change my plans. A matter I needed to speak to you on, you alone, Anders, he said, and watched as the man looked at him warily. A pressing matter for House Martell or House Yornwood? Anders asked. For us both, Anders, for us both, he said, and then tried to relieve some of the tension his words caused. Your Maester Otar, is he here? He asked, catching the man by surprise. He is. You wish to see him? Send a raven? No, just wish to know where he was. Anders, we must speak alone. I ask for your trust and give you my pledge that what I have to say is something you wish to hear, he said, and was happy to see Anders nod as they were brought to his solar. Once refreshments had been brought and Daemon along with Anders' guard stood outside to ensure they weren't disturbed. Oberyn looked at Anders, not sure where to begin. I cannot remember the girl's name. Do you know that's strange? Do you not think that these years later I cannot recall the girl's name? Oberyn said, shaking his head. You dare speak to me of her, of that whore, Anders said angrily. A woman who shares her favors willingly is no whore, and your grandfather was far too angry to keep her to his bed, and far too willing to lay the fault elsewhere, he said. And when Anders moved to stand up, he held his hand up, bidding him remain seated. I did not coat my blade with poison, he said simply, and watched as Anders looked to him. Now, many years later, you come to my home and lie to my face. You are my prince. I may owe allegiance to your house, but I'll have no man insult me in my own home, prince or no. Anders said, almost on the verge of fully blown rage. It was Otar, Oberyn said simply, watching as the Blood Royal jumped to his feet. Oberyn, too, rising and placing his hand on the man's shoulder to bid him sit back down. If you sit, I'll tell you the truth of what happened with your grandfather. Fury was a strange thing. In the wrong hands, it was wild and uncontrolled like a raging inferno, and all in its path would face its wrath, but place it in the right hands. Place it in the hands of someone who could tame that inferno. Someone who could channel that fire and fury was a dragon waiting to be unleashed. Sitting looking to Anders, he could see the man's inner dragon coming to the fore. The sheer will it took him to keep it under control. How am I to know this is not a lie? Anders asked before quickly drinking down a glass of Dornish sour. Caliat, he said simply. I had he died? Anders said, looking to him. He did. I was the one who killed him. Oberyn said, and Anders smiled, a true smile then. I have hated you for most of my life, Oberyn. While I've never plotted against you or your family, I've hated you, Anders said. I know, yet I believe you, and it makes me question how I feel. How we feel about each other is a matter for a different time. I hope this heals the rift between you and me, but should it not, then we both know where we stand. As for Otara, I ask you to await the Raven, the offer to come to visit me and Ilaria. Once you get it, then do as you must. Oh, I will, have no fear of that, my prince. I'll wait, and when I hear the truth from his lips, then I'll show him what suffering means, Anders said with a smile. He stayed a few days to make it look as if the visit was more official than it was, even spoke to the maester himself, though only briefly. When the time came, Quentyn stayed, and Oberyn smirked at that. His man amongst Quentyn's guard would see the job done should Anders fail. By the time he arrived back at Sunspear, was getting ready to leave, more than happy to see him before she did so. After speaking to his brother and telling him all was in order in Yardernwood, he and Illyria met with Arianne, asking his niece to come to his rooms before she left. "You wish to speak to me, uncle, aunt," Arianne said, walking into the room. "The Darkstar, you cannot bring him with you," Oberyn said, and immediately his niece's hackles were raised. "I wish to be protected. I can bring you, I wish to ensure that." Arianne said adamantly, "The Darkstar protects no one but himself, and is far more likely to get you into trouble than out of it. And there are other reasons also. If you insist on bringing him, then I shall write to my nephew and see your invitation revoked." Oberyn said, and even Illyria looked shocked by what he had just said. Oberyn, his paramour said, looking to him, though she turned away. When he shook his head, "Very well, uncle," Arianne said far too quickly. "Sirgerald is to accompany me on my hunt on the morrow. Niece, I'll not have you try and sneak him on your ship to prove yourself clever. It is bad enough you're bringing Dalt," he said, shaking his head. "You have trouble with Dry now, too," Arianne said exasperatedly. "I have trouble with you playing games with someone I consider a friend, someone who will not appreciate them and not act how you wish." Oberyn said, and Illyria smiled at him while Arianne looked abashed. "Uncle, no area where you're going is not the place for such games, even were it not Tyrion. You wish to rouse passions in. Trust me, his passions will be fully roused upon seeing you anyway," Oberyn said, seeing the brief smile on his niece's face. "Very well, uncle. If you'll excuse me, I have some changes I need to make with my accompaniment," Arianne said before kissing him and Illyria on the cheek and leaving. Not a moment after she had left the room, Illyria walked over to him and sat on his lap, his paramour's smile beaming as she kissed him on the lips. "And that, my love, is why I love you," she said, kissing him again. The Crossroad Inn, 2095 AC. Sir Richard Lonmouth. Had he not taken the Pinnacle ship and had the Blackfish not decided to wait until his grandnephew headed back to White Harbor? Then he was sure he'd have missed the man. As it was, he knew now that he'd had arrived a few days earlier than him, which was just as well as he had work to do before he went to Brendan. Stopping off in King's Landing, he found many whispers waiting for him, many tales his lips were singing, and so, while he waited in the inn, it was to work he got. Essos cannot find sight nor tale of either dragon, the caged or free. The Fat Magister has him hid well and travels with a large guard. He sighed when reading it. The Magister was making his presence felt in King's Landing too, and seemed to have Jon Arryn following behind him like a loyal puppy. Even with Oberyn's help, their Essos network was only now starting to bear fruit, and even with the Pinnacle ship's news was still slow to reach them. King's Landing. A fat man and a falcon planned to hurt the lion's purse. To Essos they look. He had sent the Raven to Tyrion, and hopefully he'd speak to Caven and Wyman. They needed to ensure the trade was safe. Perhaps even add more men, and he wondered exactly what it was they planned. Chataya had proved herself well, though, and he was glad she was on their side. Illyrio himself may not have yet visited the woman, but his men had no such qualms. Dorne. A princess travels west, and a viper lays a trap. On that one he had toasted more than once. The Maesters soon to find out what happens when you wake the dragon, and he was glad too that Arianne and Tyrion were getting along. While he had almost come around to the king's way of thinking, it was Oberyn who had told him of Arianne and Tyrion, which had made that even more true. A love match gave them more than they could have hoped, and kept Doran's tendencies at bay. He felt. Dragonstone. A mangy cat arrived and tried to roar, but a stag stood him down. He was surprised by that, having not expected things to escalate so soon with Stannis and Joffrey, though the boy had shown no ability to rein in or change his behavior. Having him away from the capital was a good thing, though the idea of that boy sleeping in beds of greater men irked him, as it did having Stannis do the same, to be fair. Stormlands. A young stag ruts daily and continues to ignore a mockingbird's call. While he'd yet to ascertain what Littlefinger's plans were for Renly, he knew full well how he'd got the Lord under his thumb. A useful piece of information for later. Should it be needed, though, he wondered if the king would have the stomach for it. Given the jealous and annoyed glares, he'd given the man at Margaery's named a feast, though he knew Jay would enjoy the tale all the same. The Vale. Lords wither and rage under increased costs, though pay all the same. A mockingbird relishing the increased debts proves to be an unwitting friend. At some point, Jon Arryn would get involved. He knew it, and he knew that Jenna and Tyrion would know it, but he wondered if perhaps they should relax the prices despite things While Littlefinger buying up debts kept his coin occupied, putting Jax in less danger, it gave him too big an in with the Lords of the Vale, and he worried that it may cause issues later on. He'd speak to the king when next they met. For now, he'd send a raven suggesting a relaxing of them just in case, hoping he was just being overly worried about nothing. Riverlands. A bitter fish worries on a young wolf and sees danger where there's none, as a mockingbird sings tales to both comfort and upset. In the short time he'd known Jaime had found him to be everything he'd hoped his father would be all Rhaegar could have been. But just like his father, he was beginning to worry that family ties blinded him to what needed to be done. They had all told him of the need to take a race down and be it love, blood, or not having the stomach for it. Rhaegar had refused their advice and gone his own way. He knew Jae had the stomach. He'd seen it with his own eyes, heard it in the plans they'd made together to rid the world of evil men. Will was not the issue, it was the blood, the ties to family that was, and a part of him wished nothing more than to just deal with it himself. Were there not greater battles ahead the king would face? He'd do so, as it was all he could do was watch, wait, and do his best to keep the fish in the river.